12. Theresa sat up in bed. Her thoughts were a dark and heavy shadow that laid on her mind like 1,000 pounds of cotton candy. Her naked breast showing, she leaned over the side of the bed. "Are you still there?" she asked out loud. The monster said nothing. "I know you are," she continued. "What do you want?" "You already know that," replied the monster slowly. "I want the kid." "There is no kid," Theresa cried out. She quickly censored the volume of her voice. She had hoped that the sheriff and Dan hadn't heard her outcry from downstairs. She shuddered at the thought. "Now, you and I both know that isn't true," said the monster. "What?" said Theresa. It wasn't so much a question as it was an accusation. "I'm not pregnant," she added. "What kid are you talking about? Why do you keep saying that?" And then it occurred to her, a startling realization. "Who?" she asked. The word rang through all the empty halls she could imagine. Who? The haunting sound of that word. It was a menacing owl, alone in the woods, at the stroke of some unknown midnight hour. It was the death rattle of some siren on the rocks. It was the ghostly drapes which swayed and danced by an open window. "Who is the kid?" she asked. Silence. Silence was the monster's response. It was an unwanted victory for Theresa, and she immediately rejected it. "That's bullshit," said Theresa. She was feeling a little bit braver now. Knowledge is power, and she felt that she had enough of that small fraction of knowledge to raise her voice just a little bit. "Why don't you show yourself?" she demanded. "Wherever you are." "You know where I am," came the reply. "Why don't you come look and see? I'm right here. I'm right under your bed." Theresa leaned further, cautiously, to get a better look at the floor. She hung her torso over the bed sheets, over the mattress, and let her body dangle for a moment, peeking under the bed. And there she saw them, the two red, glowing eyes. She had hoped not to see them, but there they were. "I am real," said the monster, and with that he let his hand slide out from under the bed slowly and then withdrew it. It was just there to show her, briefly, the horror. It was real. His fingers were long and webbed at the knuckles. He was green and slimy. He had long black nails that were hard like the beaks of a carnivorous bird. They were meant for tearing flesh. His skin was not a perfect green. No, it was spotted with black spots of poor pigmentation and swamp health. The skin looked as though it had belonged to a beast that not only hatched from the dark depths of a hellish marsh, but also from the inner realms of some blackwater nightmare. It had suddenly occurred to Theresa that losing her reality wasn't as traumatic as it might have seemed. In her heart of hearts, she supposed it would have been a shattering of sorts, as opposed to the slow fade that it was in all actuality. She had now turned to face it. Yes, there were monsters in the world, and this was her world. They had always existed, she supposed, and always would. From cradle to grave, they would be with us, only waiting to be seen. This is what frightened her the most. It was the realization that a slow fade was all that was needed. One only had to slowly open his or her eyes to see it all. Monsters do exist, and now nothing would be the same. Jack and a shirtless Dan entered the bedroom. Jack had, in his hand, a fresh cup of coffee. "Well, your boyfriend and I had a nice little chat," he said. Theresa felt scared by the implications of the old man's tone. It was serious. "And I think I should make one thing perfectly clear." Jack stopped and then added, "To the both of you." Jack looked around the room once more. He seemed distracted. He paced here and there, to all corners of the room, as he summoned his next statement. He checked under the bed. He saw nothing. He even checked the closet once more. He saw nothing. He stood straight and turned once more to the young couple. "The next time you want me to," he pointed under the bed, "check under the bed, or He pointed to the closet. Check the closet, or... Jack flicked the light switch on and off. Make sure the night light's on. Call your parents first. And with that, he headed for the door, handing his cup of coffee over to Dan on his way out. Dan said nothing. He felt eternally embarrassed. Jack shuddered and shook his head as he left the house. It wasn't the cool air, no, it was something else. Jack took his seat in the patrol car. He radioed in to Sheila. "You can call off the dogs," he said to her calmly. Jack, is that you?" came the voice over the line. "Yeah, it's me," said Jack. "Just a couple of kids," he added. "So no intruder?" asked Sheila. "Nope, no intruder. None that I could see, anyway." Jack sighed. "Nothing was stolen." He paused before he spoke. He wondered if he should really try and describe the situation. Without thinking too much about it, he spoke. "They said there was a monster under the bed." "A what?" asked Sheila. "A monster," said Jack. "You know, like Frankenstein." He took one more look at the house. "Yeah, I thought I'd pretty much heard it all." "Well, so did I," said Sheila. "But this is a new one." "Yep." "Hey, Sheila," he finally said. "Yeah?" "You remember when we were kids, growing up around here?" "Yeah, sure. Why wouldn't I?" "You remember that time when I went missing? When nobody could find me for those couple of days?" "Yeah," said Sheila. She seemed anxious. She had long waited for Jack to be the one to really broach this subject. Sure, she and others have tried to ask him about it in the past, but it wasn't something that he ever brought up. Sheila anticipated Jack saying a lot. She also knew this to be unrealistic, because Jack rarely said a lot about anything. "Jack," she asked, "what happened to you then?" "I think I went a little crazy," said Jack, honestly. "Well, anybody would," said Sheila, trying not to probe, but perked with polite and open ears. "You don't believe in monsters, do you?" smirked Jack. "You mean like ghosts and goblins? No, not really. But I believe in spirits." "Spirits?" "Yeah, why not?" chimed Sheila. "Yeah, I guess anything's possible." Jack drove out of the driveway and onto that dark road ahead of him, his coolly weathered mind at ease by the prospect of spirits, if in fact that's all it was he encountered all those many years ago. The North Woods were like a book of shadows, a book of unknown secrets. This is, at least, how young Jack Friedman saw them. Later in his life, he would learn to read them, their darkness, their stillness, their monolithic breath. It all added up to one long proclamation, that is, life remains hidden. He felt a similar feeling of being lost when he first encountered Joanne. He saw her face, and this is what he read. The words here are unspoken. They would be married 2 years later in the July of '97, and divorced 3 after that. She saw him as a box she could never open, and so she left him one night. There was a note, and Jack wasn't surprised to find it. There were the usual platitudes. She wrote about how their relationship was failing and how she found Jack too inaccessible. How she had hoped, after all that time they spent together, invested were her words, Jack would finally reveal more of a personality to her, more of his inner self. As he drove down those dark rural roads, Jack tried to remember exactly what the note said. He tried to quote it in his mind, but he couldn't, and he tried not to let this bother him. He quietly assumed that it was the meeting of that young couple at Furrow Drive that sparked his thoughts on Joanne in the forest. He hadn't spoken to her in years. He mused that she was probably remarried by now. She probably had a whole other life by now, and Jack was all still pretty much the same. It didn't bother him, though he did wonder what his life might have been like had she stayed. Would they have had kids by now? 13. Dan kissed her forehead. Theresa hung her body low as they huddled together. He whispered into her ear, "Run for the door." "I can still hear you," came the voice. "I might not be able to grab your ankles. I might not be able to do this," stressed the monster's voice. "I might not be able to reach you, but until I get what I want, I'm not going anywhere." She shook her head. It was not possible for her to ignore such a voice in such a situation. She was scared. She was terrified. "Go," said Dan. "Just do it. I'll distract him." Dan had a firm grip on her arm now. She felt him squeeze it, and it made her tense. "No, Dan," she said. "Go, or I'll push you off," said Dan. "I have long arms," said the voice. Dan turned to the opposite side of the bed. He stomped his feet down on the floor, and then lifted them quickly. There was no reaction from the beast beneath. He began to do it again and again. It became a rhythm, almost a drumbeat. Theresa looked to the open door. In her mind, she decided that her feet would land on the floor the same time as Dan's. She jumped from the bed as far as she could and screamed. Her pace to the door was hurried with quick, timid steps, and her body jiggled in the humiliation of fear. But she made it. The hand had missed her feet. It was Dan's turn now. He was perched on all fours, looking over at the floor. "I know you're there," said the voice. "Why can't you come out and get me?" asked Dan. "My place is here," said the voice. Dan dashed from the bed with long strides and made it to the door in no time. And it was soon after that Dan and Theresa slept on the kitchen floor. There were no words between them. They slept naked on the linoleum floor, no blankets, no pillows. They had to leave their bodies for a while. The only dreams they had were quaint sensations that ached on the sharp edge between sleep and awakeness. It was a light sleep. It was only a few hours that passed in which Dan and Theresa found themselves in half-sleep. It was useless to try and go deep into the oblivion of sleep, and so, after a few meaningful exchanges between their eyes, they decided to forfeit their efforts. Their bodies were sticky, needing to be pulled from the linoleum floor. Dan got up from the floor and said nothing. He gripped Theresa's hand and pulled her up as well. They both knew that this wasn't over. Theresa said nothing. She just stood there, dazed, as Dan went back upstairs to retrieve their clothes. Theresa waited. She thought of what the voice said, and she feared for Dan's safety. He came trotting back down the steps again and entered the kitchen slowly. Theresa tried not to notice that Dan had peed his pants a little. She looked at him with big doe eyes. "You didn't bring me my clothes," she whispered, but her disappointment spoke volumes. Dan just looked at her. Their obvious silent nature was becoming increasingly more difficult to ignore. They were starting to become awkward together, like strangers. Theresa wiped a tear from her eye. "It's okay," said Dan. His voice was soft. A genuine desire to make the woman he loved feel at ease came over him. But despite his tone, all alone, all by herself, she felt this horrid sensation of losing sight and ground on a soft, sinking bed of uncertainty. "Well, I'm not going in there," whimpered, and desperate, her voice fled her. Dan turned on his heels without thinking and headed back upstairs. The room was vacant, save for the fog of resentment and the air of a fearsome guest. Under the bed, it was dark. Dan slowly creaked the door open and peeked inside. It was different before, when he wasn't thinking. But now, with a conscious effort, this lair that had so tormented Theresa and himself all but a few hours ago was different. "Come in," said the voice. Dan shuddered as he saw the monster's green arm and claw motion slowly from under the bed. It was like a card dealer, bringing it all back home, calling the bluff, summoning Dan's inevitable defeat. "I won't be staying long," said Dan. came the voice's reply. It was a slow rattle of sarcastic contemplation. Dan slammed the door shut. He was not going into that room anymore. He came back downstairs to find that, yes, still she stood, only now Theresa had found a blanket to wrap herself in. She looked like an oil painting, Dan thought. One of the older ones, like Venus in a half-shell, or one of the other ones featuring some obscure Greek goddess. Dan took a seat on the floor with his back against the wall and lit a cigarette. The kitchen table sat empty. For some reason, he and Theresa were unconsciously avoiding all of the furniture in the house. Perhaps there was a monster under everything now. "You need to go up there and get me some clothes," said Theresa. She was angry now, frustrated. She needed Dan to have some worth to her. "Yeah, I know," said Dan, and with that, he thought for a moment to himself, long and hard. "How are we supposed to kill it?" he asked. "What?" "Do you think I could use a gun?" Dan himself could not believe he was having this conversation. He masked the absurdity of the situation by making himself sound like the hero of some horror movie. Though beneath this talk, the words really did come from his heart. He wanted to kill, not to maim. He wanted to hunt and gather. He wanted to breathe steely and stand tall. "You don't want to make it angry," said Theresa. "I think it already is." "No, what he is now is—" Theresa stopped. She sat down at the kitchen table, the very same table Dan had completely forgotten when he found a seat on the floor. "Confident," she said. "If it talks, it must be alive, and if it's alive, there must be a way to kill it." "Nobody's ever going to believe us." Theresa's words were lost and drifting, for she spoke from a place that was somewhere behind her pale complexion, what used to be a familiar face. There was so much fear in that place behind her face, that it was like the lonely watchtower from where all those damsels in distress used to be in the old fairy tales. They would weep and moan, weaving their sad words into sad silk, sad and beautiful silk. Theresa regretted sleeping naked, and now here she was. Without fear, she was nothing, because that's all there was. "I'm going to shoot it right in the fucking face," said Daniel in a daze. "It's a monster, sure, but it's alive, and if it's alive, I can kill it." Dan got up. He lifted himself to his feet and approached Theresa. He leaned over her at the kitchen table and tried to hold her. She was there, but she wasn't there. She offered no reaction to him. "If it's alive, I can kill it." Theresa looked long and deep into the lost and mad eyes of the man she loved. He was there, but he wasn't there. For she knew that her man, the man she loved, was a total and utter fuck-up, and cast that up against the sky of the unknown, the sky of the supernatural, and oh, how foolish was mankind. Like boys with sticks and arrows, against everything that was dark and beyond them, Dan was destined to fail. Theresa had made the commitment to love him even then. Foolish and beautiful was his ignorance, like the ignorance of an insolent boy, a child. Was every man a child, she wondered? They were there, and they weren't. They were either lost, or they had lost. But it was this very same childlike nature that endowed Dan with a hidden gift, potential. Was he the kid? Where was his shotgun, she wondered in resolution. "Where is your shotgun?" Theresa asked in a daze. Dan kissed her forehead. "I promise you," he said, "I will kill it." 14. The smell of the basement brought an odd sense of comfort to Dan. The wooden steps creaked and squeaked as the flat soles of his shoes descended down the small flight. He found the chain to the light that dangled after only a moment of searching. He pulled, and it clicked, and a dull, dirty yellow illuminated the circumference. Beyond that, there were many shadows. Dan was on a mission. He knew where to look. It was buried. First he removed the bicycle, then some boxes, and then there it was, a wooden chest that had aged about as well as his father. It was locked, but the first thought that Dan had was that the hinges were rusted, and where they met the wooden planks looked vulnerable. Dan kicked the chest. He kicked and he kicked and he kicked until the hinges came off. It was a cathartic experience for him. There was a lot of frustration in those kicks. The entire night summed up in one kick after the other. He carelessly tossed the lid. There were a bunch of stuff there. Most of it was indistinguishable, but there at the bottom was the old .22 Dan used to shoot as a kid. He took it out and dusted it off. He found a small, dilapidated box of ammo to one side, and he grabbed that too. Theresa waited for him at the top of the stairs, half naked in her makeshift adornment. The blanket she wore covered her breasts, but she was naked from the waist down. Dan came up the stairs and passed her with the gun in his hand. His eyes were serious and focused. Theresa stood for an instant before she started to trail behind him. "Dan," she called out. "Dan, wait for me." And with that she followed. She trailed after him up the steps of the staircase like a flower girl, childish and carrying fragile rose petals in her heart of hearts. It would have been embarrassing to be so needy if she wasn't so needy. But she was. She was exactly what she was feeling in that time. They entered the upstairs hallway, and Dan began to awkwardly load his rifle. It was difficult to do with just 2 hands and a whole lot of nerves. He slowly approached the bedroom, his back sliding against the wall. The light was on inside. "Are you still in there?" asked Dan. "Yes," came the hiss from under the bed. "I'm still here." "Good," replied Dan, determined. "I can't wait to fucking kill you." And with that he dashed into the room like a SWAT team and jumped up onto the bed. He stood there, his body shifting with every step against the give of the mattress. Theresa poked her head inside to watch. 9 little monkeys jumping on the bed. One fell off and bumped his head. Mama called the doctor, and the doctor said, "No more monkeys jumping on the bed." These words entered her mind from that long tunnel that led to childhood memories. "No more monkeys jumping on the bed," said the voice. Dan didn't listen to the monster. He fired a shot into the mattress. Theresa shrieked. He fired 2 more. There was nothing, no sound, no death rattle from the monster, no more talk of monkeys. In the dining room below, tiny bullet holes appeared, from which eyes began to peer. Dan stood on the bed and aimed once more with his rifle. His eyes squinted, hiding what goodness lay in them, allowing only the cynical soul of a boy now corrupted to shine through. Dan's rifle would do the talking. Theresa didn't like what she saw. She wanted Dan to stop. "Dan," she said, "let's go." "I'm going to put 5 bullets through the mattress and 5 bullets through whatever keeps talking to us," he said. "Bullets aren't going to do it," pleaded Theresa. "Then what?" asked Dan. "I don't know," she said. Her body began to curl within the blanket she wore. She was collapsing now, right before Dan, and Dan knew it. Bullets are not going to do it. That monster owned her now. It became her greatest fear, and she became a pebble in its tightly clenched fist. But she managed to open the door to that dark room where Dan had found himself, in his mind, alone. Her weakness, her confusion, her vulnerability had opened that seemingly impenetrable door for Dan and allowed him to submit to the reason of other options. "Then what?" he snapped through the defensive screen which clouded his fear. "If not a gun, then what?" he continued. "I don't know," said Theresa. Dan got off the bed. He wasn't worried now. He walked almost casually back to Theresa. It was a strut. As Dan approached her, she asked, "Where are we going to sleep tonight?" She layered the moment with the pace of an overwhelming defeat. "With my dick," said Dan, with spite. It was the tail end of everything he knew now. It was the tail end of his soul escaping. Dan was angry. He was angry that the bullets didn't work. He was angry that the monster wasn't dead. He was angry now that the ceiling of the living room was holed by several reminders that all of his efforts were futile. Theresa slapped him across the face. Now was not the time for Dan's machismo. Dan just looked at Theresa for a moment before... "What about my clothes?" she asked. But it was too late. Dan was already gone, down the hall and out of sight. "15. Theresa wore a heavy coat. It was long, and it was what she would normally wear in the winter, with its stitched pockets of cotton and other filling. Beneath it she was naked. She sat in the passenger seat next to Dan in the front of their car. Dan would curve around each corner, hoping, looking for any motel, the sanctuary from the great beast, that castle. They would arrive there. Theresa said nothing. Their circumstances were unique. She knew this, and beneath that great bucket at the bottom of the well she could weep without even trying. She did not reach for it, only waited for Daniel to try and help her. The Sleep-Tight Motel was as empty as a church with no priest, and it sat at the corner of Taylor Avenue and Route 1. Dan had driven 40 minutes in a daze. He pulled into the lot and hoped that the place was not condemned. The vacancy sign was never visible. The car parked in its slot. Theresa turned to Dan as she did when she was running the show. "Book us a room," she said, with no room for question. Dan looked at her and then jerked his head forward. "Ah," he said. The words stalled in his mouth. A man in cement, talking himself out, asking like, "What just happened?" "Ah," he continued. "What do you want me to tell them?" he inquired. "Tell them there's a monster living under our bed," said Theresa. Her tone had changed. Suddenly this became a game. Suddenly reality shifted with Theresa at the helm, and she was riding it like a cowgirl in love. "You're crazy," was all Dan could say. "You don't know the half of it," replied Theresa. "And until you go out and buy me some new clothes, you're going to find out just how crazy I am." The implications of that statement, Dan recognized the weight. It was somebody playing like somebody knew what the hell was going on. It was sad, in fact, and the last thing they needed. He knew how Theresa would get, making light of the situation, any situation. She leaned over and kissed him. Dan did not return the kiss. His lips remained firm like unwanted fillets. They never parted. "So let me get this straight," started Dan. "You want me to go out and buy me some new clothes," continued Theresa. "Right now?" "Yes." Dan sensed that even now Theresa could feel it, feel herself fuck that floating spirit of fear away. We're in a new bed now. New bed, new rules. Dan looked away and stared out the window. His eyes became lost against the darkness of the sky. New bed, new me, new you. You're running away with yourself, said Dan, opening up his door to get out. Where am I going to get new clothes at this time of night? Why can't you just wait until morning? Theresa didn't answer him. Dan knew what game she was playing, and he knew that the cowgirl sitting to his right was going to get flung from this natural high of hers and land flat on her face in the dirt of reality. What would happen then? When there were no clothes delivered tonight, what would happen with all of that energy? Dan weighed the thought of sex with Theresa in his mind. It would be a welcomed release, but he doubted severely it ever coming to fruition. All right, he tried. But first, book us a room, was all she said. She had swatted the mirror down which hung above the windshield of the car. Right beside it were safety instructions for adjusting one's seatbelt. Theresa applied some lip balm. You seem to be taking this all in stride, said Dan, cautiously. He handed her the compliment like an uncertain gift. I'm just glad to get out of that house. For the first time she had turned her eyes from the mirror, and they touched Dan's heart like the swift blade of a samurai sword. There was something mysterious about her demeanor. Dan said nothing. All right, he finally spoke. He shut the door and left the car. Theresa waited. "16. Melanie was not ashamed of her television. She was in love with it. The light, the box, and in particular, what was on the box. She used to date Chad Birmingham, and now he starred on a popular soap opera. She would tape the shows and then watch them at work, the midnight shift, so not to be interrupted by her two screaming kids, Jacob and Tina. Chad was a nice enough fellow, though she suspected him to be gay at the time. He was shy, and he didn't come from money. She never saw in him the ambition he secretly held, and so it shocked her the day she first saw him on TV. It was in the middle of a great dust-up between her and Jim, her fourth boyfriend since the birth of Tina. At first it was with the corner of her eye, but then she turned and saw him. He was in the box in her living room. He was there. He was with her. Only he wasn't himself. He played a character by the name of Blake Tanner, a brain surgeon with a lousy southern drawl. Chad was distant in the times after sex. He was distant most times. Nothing like the great Dr. Blake Tanner. She wished that Jim would play a character, someone different, someone better. Months later, she found herself obsessed with Our Lives Together. And so now here she was, a lady at a desk. She was caught as she looked up to see Dan standing there. It was the first time she had felt embarrassed in a long time. It was the first time she felt the need to be embarrassed in a long time. She had just been sliding that middle finger of hers down, way down, to that place where the sparks met the river. She hadn't quite made it yet when Dan interrupted her with a very real silence. She wondered what he must have been thinking. He looked confused, perhaps from her demeanor, on top of being completely and utterly disheveled. "Yes?" she asked, composing herself quickly. "Can I help you?" "I need a room for the night," said Dan. "Just one?" asked Melanie, almost flirtatiously. "Yeah," replied Dan, "just one, with a bed." He looked distracted. "A big one," he continued. Melanie became her usual casual self. "You look tired," she said. "It's good to see you off the road." "Well, it's good to be off the road." "You ever want to get off, you come here," said Melanie. She let that one slip. "You talk to me." She didn't know why she continued. "Just a bed will be fine," said Dan. He rubbed the bags underneath his eyes. Melanie felt hurt. She felt shattered, unwanted. She felt stupid. "But thanks," he added with a sly smile. She knew now that he was spoken for, but his smile reassured her slender good looks and, albeit aging, open charm. "Room 25, she said. "That'll be $31.50 with tax." Dan handed her the cash. "Good," she said. The exchange was benevolent, despite the forces that had so drawn her closer to him just a moment ago. Forces unseen, unbeknownst to her. They pulled and sucked, but now they were gone, and she was happy, relieved. "Fuck," said Dan out loud, but to himself, as he took the key and headed out the door. There in the car, it was Theresa. She sat, all wrapped up and waiting. As Dan approached, he sensed some doubt from her steady look. He almost detoured his way directly to the car when he noticed her eyes were fixed on the doors of the motel. She was only off by 3 or 4. Room 25 was there, and waiting. Dan came to the door and gestured to Theresa. "This is it," he said without speaking. But she didn't come answer to his beckon. She just sat there, perfectly still. Dan approached the car now. "I don't like it," said Theresa, rolling down her window. "Well, this is all there is," replied Dan. "Honey, it's late." "It seems haunted," said Theresa. "What seems haunted? The rooms?" Dan was frustrated now. He just wanted to sleep. "The whole night," she replied vacantly. Dan looked down at her bare breasts barely showing from beneath the blanket. "Yeah, well, I got some shopping to do," he said absent-mindedly. He opened the passenger side door, and as if Theresa was 80, escorted her from the vehicle. He ushered her to the motel room, and with his electronic key card, he opened the door into the darkness. Dan reached against the wall until he found a switch to flick, and with that, the lights came on, buzzing at first. The room was a cold chill for livable quarters. It had not been redecorated in decades, and both Dan and Theresa could see that even in its prime it was a poor substitute for home. "It's just for the night," said Dan. "And then what?" asked Theresa. "And then?" Dan became flustered. "And then I don't know what. I'm sorry, Theresa. I don't have all the answers." He looked around the room. "I think we just need to sleep this one off, that's all." Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, looking up at Dan. Dan grabbed the remote from the TV and turned it on. He handed Theresa the remote, and she said nothing, nor did she turn her attention to the infomercial that was now drowning out the silence between them. "I gotta go," he said, and with that, he left, shutting the door behind him. 17. Dan drove the streets alone, thankful to be alone. It was quiet, and there weren't a lot of people out. He knew that the odds of finding a place still open that sold clothing were slim to none, but he just needed to be away from Theresa at that time. He felt pulled by her in an unwanted way. He did not want to feel what she was feeling. He suddenly saw the bright lights from an illuminated glass storefront. The white light from the fluorescent inside spilt into the street darkness, and Dan felt compelled to look. He saw in the window a mannequin, several in fact, each one wearing something more erotic than the last, a French maid, a sexy nurse, and a dominatrix. They were expressionless, much like the way Theresa looked as she waited in the car. Dan pulled his car over along the curb. He saw the neon sign blinking the word open. He got out of his car and he went inside. Whether this was a good idea or a bad idea, Dan did not care. It was an idea. It was something Theresa could wear, something to make her feel less naked. When Dan did enter, a bell on top of the door rang, catching the attention of an attractive young woman at the end of the store. She looked to have the features of some northern European export. Her hair was blonde and her eyes were blue. Her face seemed fragile and almost cat-like, and her body was very thin. Dan tried not to make eye contact with her as he pretended to browse through an aisle of women's erotic clothing. The walls of the store were lined with sex toys. Dan wanted to quickly make a purchase before this whole scene got any more uncomfortable. Aside from the woman, whom he now assumed worked there, he was the only other person in the store. Like a sniper without a scope, he rummaged the long rack of dresses. Some actually shocked him. There was a little Bo Peep costume, a Catwoman costume, a Catholic schoolgirl costume, and lingerie. There was a sexy devil costume, a Roman goddess costume, a policewoman costume, and more lingerie. It was all there, everything that a man could desire or dream of. Dan began to notice that the woman was strolling behind him, around him, continuously. She was making her rounds, sure, making sure that the clothes racks had remained unruffled and also unthieved, but also making sure that Dan knew she was still there. Dan wondered if she looked for something to illuminate the puzzle of a troubled man's heart. He felt like a lamb. But why was he troubled? She probably wondered. In this particular instance, much like buying the products of a woman's embarrassing condition, Dan had dulled his senses so not to notice the stares of others. Love has a funny way of putting a lid on a man's heart, as if to say, well, there's stew in the crock, let it cook. The young woman came up on Dan and grabbed him in his crotch. "Do you like to wear women's clothing?" she asked. Dan swatted her hand away. "No," he said. "This isn't for me," he added. She just looked at him, failing to see his humor. A man who shops for his girlfriend without her presence is a man in dire circumstances. This is a man looking for an apology, his own apology. Maybe he forgot a birthday. "This isn't for me." The words rang true like a bell in the empty echoes of a dark cathedral. Was this the place a man would ever expect to find himself? A sex shop? She looked at him once more. "What's her name?" she asked. Dan's early suspicions were confirmed as she spoke with a Ukrainian accent. "Her name is," started Dan. "Whatever yours isn't." "What?" asked the woman. Dan began to carry that solemn weight under his tongue, the kind of talk that all attached men speak with. "How big are you?" he asked. She looked at him, waiting by her own precognizance to pounce, attack. Dan saw this. "You're the same size," he said. And she was. Was that all there was to Theresa, just a size? Things seemed like the dust from a settled mushroom cloud. There were beautiful women everywhere. This is what Daniel thought. felt. "Would you like me to try something on?" The young woman was auditioning now. She was offering her services. "No," said Dan, "that won't be necessary." He spoke officially, as all men should. It was by averting his gaze from this beautiful young woman that Dan discovered the outfit, the perfect thing for Theresa. It was there, waiting to be purchased. There was nothing overt about the leather jumpsuit. It had no distinguishable features save for the fact that it was entirely black and had a certain shine in the right light. It would be a suit of armor for Theresa. Dan held it in his hand a moment, and he felt the thickness of its making. He tried to imagine claws, being unable to sever or penetrate it. The young woman suddenly ran her fingers through his hair. "Stay here with me," she smiled coolly. "I can work for you." Dan looked at her and saw something very seductive and very devilish about her. He saw the choice to be made, and he leaned himself correctly. "I think I'll just pay for it now," he said, "if that's all right with you." There was a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "That's fine," she sighed. "Are you sure you don't want anything else?" Dan's eyes caught sight of a rather large pet iguana that leisurely perched upon one of the top shelves that lined the wall of the store. It was green and scaly, and it reminded Dan in a momentary flood of panic all of the fear he had attempted to flee. In a moment of unrealized panic, he turned quickly and looked to the young woman, who smiled knowingly. "I'm about as sure as I'll ever be." He thought that he might come across as insulting, but at the same time he didn't really care. He just wanted to get back to Theresa. It was a mistake to leave her. "18. Theresa sat on the bed, her back against the wall, and hugged her knees. She tried not to watch the TV, though it was nice to have on. She wondered what was taking Dan so long until she realized that he had only left but a half hour ago. "Are you here? Are you down there?" she asked, almost to herself. "Yes, I'm still here," said the voice. It came from under the bed. Theresa stifled a shriek. She softly began to bang the back of her head against the wall. "You can never run from me," came the invited reply. "Why not?" she asked. "Because I am everywhere." "Bullshit," said Theresa. "I'll prove it to you," said the voice. There was an unease that suddenly grew in the room. It expanded silently like the air in your lungs. Melanie Schwartz was once again alone in the lobby, if you would call it that. The lobby consisted of a couch, a chair, a fake plant, old carpeting, and a desk where she sat. Behind that desk, of course, was the small TV she now held in her lap. She would never be alone again just so long as she held that TV, Dr. Blake Tanner, in her hands. She felt the presence of someone or something behind her. It was like the weight of a heavy fog that rested itself on the back of her shoulders and slid itself into the back of her mind. She began to hope a strong hope. Was it Dr. Blake Tanner, the esteemed neurosurgeon from Port City, as featured on Our Lives Together? Was it him behind her? Did he just place his rugged hands upon her shoulders? She dared not to turn around and see. It was better just to dream. She looked down to see him on the TV. He was engaging in a passionate dispute with his scheming mistress while his wife lay in a coma. Melanie knew that Dr. Tanner could be on TV and in the room with her because the TV wasn't real. She wasn't crazy. Heck, they probably shot that scene weeks ago. "Do it," said the voice. It came from behind her, and it did not sound like Dr. Tanner. Yet still, Melanie could not turn around. Maybe his voice was different in real life. It seemed darker and more commanding. But she did love him so. She would do anything for Dr. Tanner. She slowly leaned forward and kissed the TV screen. The electricity was magic. She felt it everywhere. It started from her lips and traveled through her cheeks, and then into her mind and down her body. "I can't feel you," said the voice. "You'll have to break through." Melanie understood what this meant completely. She lifted her head up and stared at the ceiling for a moment. It was dark. Shadows had crept into the room. She closed her eyes lovingly, as if to make a silent prayer, and with a thrust of strength she brought her head down with a speed and surgence she herself had not known to be capable of. Her face shattered the old TV screen. It broke like hot glass. Instantly she felt pain like she had never before imagined. The electricity, what was once just moments ago so magical, now felt like razors raping every nerve ending in her face. Blood was everywhere. It had even gotten into her eyes slightly. She pulled her face from the TV and screamed loudly. Shards of glass had pierced her cheeks and chin and had cut her lips. She let the broken TV drop from her lap and began to pick the pieces out of her face. She was crying in hysterics. Why did she do this? Why did she just do this? First it was her cheeks. The larger shards of glass could be pulled out easily. They slid from her fat and skin tissue like butter knives. The tinier pieces had to be picked out painfully. She felt around her forehead until her tender fingers softly gripped the largest shard yet. It was about 3 inches, and Melanie knew that it had penetrated her skull because she could feel it puncture her spongy frontal lobe. Her bloody fingers made it difficult to get a good grip on the glass to pull it out. She needed Dr. Blake Tanner now more than ever. It was his expertise as a neurosurgeon which now remained her only hope. And once he had met her, had seen her again, then maybe they would fall in love all over again. There was hope for Melanie still. But where was he, she wondered. "Room 25, said the voice behind her. The doors to the motel lobby flung open in a fury as Melanie stumbled outside with her hands outstretched. Her mouth was open and strained in misery, and some of the blood began to congeal in her hair. She stepped through the parking lot, disoriented and broken, passing by the doors with numbers 21, 22, 23, and then finally she was there. She placed her bloody palm on the door, just below the number, meaning to knock. But she had to catch her breath first. She found herself thinking how to speak. She had never thought about how to speak before, and the fact that this was something she now had to do concerned her, even after she chose to simplify in lieu of an emergency. The words could not form in her mouth. Dr. Blake Tanner. Duh, 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 was all she could muster. The glass that had found its way through her forehead was having an unforeseen effect on her speech abilities, or perhaps it was the shock. Whatever the case, she needed him, and she needed him now. She began to bang on the door with the bloody palm of her hand. What started out on the door as a clearly defined handprint in red quickly became some work of modern art of pain and frantic communication. It looked like a Jackson Pollock now. Theresa sat on the bed, and yes, she heard it. The banging on the door. She covered her ears the best she could. Da, 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 came the voice on the other end. Who could possibly be looking for Dan right now, she thought. He's not here, Theresa screamed, with her hands still covering her ears. Melanie tried to think. If he wasn't here, then where could he be? She tried to think, but her brain was bleeding so badly. The motel itself was hugged from behind by a strong tree line and kissed by some forgotten root of pavement and the occasional passing car. Dr. Blake Tanner had lied to her, but he was still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. She left the door quietly and headed for the dark woods that lay beyond the motel. The branches were thick, but they swayed and turned from her with every decisive brush. It was like a never-ending door. Melanie called out, "Blake! Blake, I need you," she cried. It was there, in her final moments, that she saw something approaching. It was large, and it stood tall like a man. God knows what it was. Melanie quickly sat on the ground. Collapse would be more accurate, and let her life slip away from her like a dream. It was a dream, and soon she would be in heaven with Dr. Blake Tanner. But now, he wasn't with her now. That wasn't him coming from the shadows. It was something dark and horrific. It was something entirely different. Theresa wanted to eat herself. If she could, she would have. She wanted to bend down and eat herself away completely so that she could no longer be existing at that moment, the moment just before the voice began to speak again. The voice, that dreaded and unwanted slayer of reality, of truth. "I told you I could prove it to you," said the voice. "Who was that?" asked Theresa. "Was that you banging at the door?" "In a manner of speaking," came the reply. "I'm in all things, and right now I'm under your bed." Theresa detected the sadistic sense of humor that the monster was emitting, and it made her feel even more powerless. "Just you wait," she said as a child. "When Dan gets back here with clothes for me and a new way to face you, you're going to be in big trouble." The voice said nothing. It was Theresa who owned the silence now. "You can't play those games with me," she said. "Oh, yes, I can," said the voice. "Not for long," came Theresa's response. It was quick, like they were fencing, and it wasn't long after that when Dan returned. Nineteen. Dan pulled the car into his parking spot in front of the motel. Before he turned the engine off, he looked over to the box that sat in the passenger seat, the box that contained Theresa's new skin. He thought about it a moment, then grabbed it and proceeded out of the car and towards the door. Melanie's bloodstains became immediately apparent as he approached room 25. A surge of fear shrank Dan's testicles and his jaw went slack. He took a cautious step forward. "Theresa?" he said softly, not expecting her to answer. He rapped the door lightly. Theresa screamed from inside. "Theresa, it's me," Dan called out. Dan entered the room to find Theresa on the bed. "What's happened?" he pleaded discreetly. "There's blood on the door." "He's here," she said. "Under the bed." Dan tossed the box aside and got down on all fours. He took his cigarette lighter out and lit it. A warm, luminous glow flowed through the space under Theresa's bed like a river. But there was nothing there. No monster. Dan sat up on the floor and looked up at Theresa. "There's blood on the door," he said. Theresa looked over to the open door, and for the first time she saw it. She shook her head no. "What is it?" "I don't know what this is," she managed to say. "Theresa, that's blood. Whose blood is it?" "I don't know," said Theresa. "He came looking for you." "Who?" "Him," she shouted. "The monster." "Theresa, stop. This is serious." "I don't know whose blood that is." She paused a moment. "He sounded different." "What?" "He sounded like a woman." Dan heard this and then pointed to the bloodstains on the door. "That's a woman's blood?" he asked. "I don't know," she said again. "How do you know he came for me?" "He tried to say your name." Theresa's eyes were trailing now. "She tried to say your name." "The woman?" "Yes." Dan got to his feet. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Whoever it is, I have to go and find them." "No," said Theresa. "Stay here with me." "We have to call the police. If we don't, they'll think we were involved." "And we weren't involved, were we?" "I don't know," cried Theresa. Dan looked at her long and hard. She was completely broken. What was happening? And then, without thinking, Dan started to act. He went into the bathroom and retrieved a face cloth. He soaked it in hot water from the faucet. As Dan exited the bathroom, he passed by Theresa on the bed. "Someday you're going to tell me all about this," he muttered angrily. "I already told you, I don't know." Dan looked at her again before he started to scrub the door. He didn't want to believe her, but he did. After the face cloth became bloodied and the door sufficiently cleaned, Dan tossed it in the trash and shut the door and locked it. Theresa was staring at the box as if she would open it with her mind. Dan walked over and picked it up. He handed it to her. "We can't stay here," said Theresa. "Yes, we can," said Dan. "We can stay here for the night. We've got each other." Theresa began to slowly open the box. "We can't run from this thing. It told me that." "We don't need to run from it anymore. You're safe with this," said Dan. Theresa now held the leather in her hand. "No claws can cut you. No teeth can bite you. Whatever the fuck it is you think you keep seeing, it can't hurt you while you wear this." Theresa ran her fingers along the seamless jumpsuit. "It's thick, like your skin," said Dan. "You've seen it too," said Theresa timidly. "Yeah," said Dan. His heart was bloated with the feeling of being self-conscious. "I saw it too." Theresa hugged him, and he tried not to feel smothered. He tried to love her in that moment, and eventually, after he was able to cast out certain thoughts, he did. If love was a monster, Dan would slay it. He and Theresa would slay it and become something more. Dan leaned back on the bed. His exhaustion hit him in the head like a freight train. He pulled Theresa down to lay next to him. She still held the leather. "I want to wear this," she said. "You can be naked with me," said Dan, his eyes now slowly escaping him, retreating behind their lids.
"I know," said Theresa, as she got up from the bed and went to the bathroom to put on her suit. Dan, realizing her absence from the bed now, tried to speak one last time before sleep. "I'll wait for you," he finally mustered, but when Theresa returned from the bathroom, he was long gone. "Dan," she said, hesitant to approach the bed where the hands of the monster might grab her. "Don't leave me," she said. "Dan, are you awake?" "He's gone," said the voice. As soon as Theresa had heard her adversary speak, she quickly determined that her anticipation was greater than her fear now. She wore leather. "I'm not scared of you," she said as she stepped towards the bed. "Not yet," said the voice. Theresa's steps turned to a sprint and a dash, and she soon landed onto the bed, next to Dan, who did not wake from his slumber. She had the protection now, the suit, thanks to Dan, but what she needed most was a weapon. She snuggled in close to her man and let every feeling of her body float away. Dan was in the house of dreams. It was a world of saturated colors and tones. Gold and black ruled over the dimmer reds and blues with an ironclad fist. At least this is what Dan saw. Perhaps it was what he wanted to see. His eyes seemed to be glossed over because the lights in the room shined and reflected off things that normally would seem implausible. He was in his bedroom as a child. He was in his bedroom and in his bed. He was barely awake. He was pretending to be asleep as he saw the door to his closet slowly creak open. It was a small closet, so Dan was so shocked and horrified to see so many cloaked adults exit from it. The cloaks were black, and Dan could not see their faces. There were 5 of them now. One of them, the last one to exit the closet, carried a small baby in its arms. But it was not a normal baby. Dan could not see anything normal about this child save for the fact that it had a head and 2 arms and 2 legs. It was green and black like a frog. Its eyes were squinted shut, and it was crying the most horrible sound. But Dan's parents could not hear it, and so they would not wake up and come rescue him from this horrible sight. It had sharp fingers and teeth, and it struggled in the grip of the cloaked man who carried it like a loaf of bread. They all gathered to one side of Dan's bed, as if they were waiting for some ritual to begin. Dan sat up now, but he could not speak. He watched in terror as the man with the baby approached him. The man showed the ugly baby to Dan. The man held the baby up close to Dan's face, and Dan quickly turned away. He sensed that the baby monster was not as close to him as it once was, and so he turned back around just in time to see the cloaked man place the baby under his bed. "No," said Dan, finally able to speak. "Don't do that." Dan bolted awake in the cool, dark motel room. He was sweating, and the moonlight from the window pasted itself onto his skin. He looked over to Theresa, who was sleeping calmly in her skin and leather. He wondered what was going on behind her peaceful face, and if he should wake her. Theresa was trapped in the house of dreams. It was a similar situation. She was a child of the same age as young Dan, and her bed was surrounded by the cult of cloaked druids. She did not want them to, but they placed the baby monster under her bed. She screamed out loud as she was finally able to speak. She was still screaming as Dan shook her to consciousness. They were back in the motel room now. It was morning, though. The sunlight had finally arrived. It was the most welcoming thing Theresa could imagine, but she was still recovering from her horrible fright. "Dan," she gasped, "I had the most horrible dream." "So did I," said Dan. Theresa felt the urge to not explain her dream to Dan at the risk of entering into some sort of competition with him. "What happened last night?" she asked, hoping that it was all just a dream. "I think we lost our minds," replied Dan coolly. He got from the bed, naked, and headed for the shower. The hot water cleansed him. It dripped from his face, from the top of his head, like a bleeding, sensuous halo. Dan's body was soaked now and ready to be dried. As he stepped out of the shower, he thought of all the possible ways hallucinogenics could have been involved in the previous night's beginnings. Was it the strip club? Could Jeremy have had a hand in all of this? Was it the hospital, the nurse, the bloody door? He thought of the sheriff they had met on the kitchen floor. He thought about everything but the monster. That was the one thing he did not wish to review as he readied himself to face Theresa. "20. Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, facing the bathroom. In one hand she held the Gideon's Bible. In the other, it was a phone book. She examined each book separately, noting their covers, their weight, the feel of their pages. A fly on the wall might have assumed it was nothing more than boredom that led her to contemplate the two items, but to Theresa, it was a solemn desperation. Setting one aside, she found the answer in the yellow pages. When Dan exited the bathroom, dressed and cleaned and shaven, Theresa looked him in the eyes. "I don't think I'm going to work today," she said. "That's fine," said Dan. He understood. He had even contemplated the same course of action, but Theresa's proclamation decided it for him. He did not want to spend the day with Theresa, so he was going to work. "I have to make sure that other people get to where they're going," said Dan. Theresa knew this to be one of Dan's common sayings, a fancy way of saying he worked at a toll booth. It was welcoming to her to see Dan trying to bring back a bit of normalcy, one little tiny expression at a time. Her only hope was that the normalcy would last through the night. Dan left without kissing Theresa goodbye, and she made a phone call. The sign out front looked exactly like how Theresa would have expected it to. It was lined with neon lights, and since it was daytime, they were turned off. There was a giant symbolic eye, opened, at the center of the sign. The sign led to a basement entrance in the back of an old street-side Victorian home. The building itself was in need of some slight maintenance. Theresa saw a generic open sign hanging on the door's window as she huddled down a few cement steps. The door stuck a little bit, but Theresa opened it with a push. A small bell rang above her. The hallway was dark and shady. It was lined with red velvet and was lit by oil lanterns. There was an unoccupied glass counter with a cash register that immediately greeted her. Inside the glass counter were trinkets, small crystals, and a couple of pipes for smoking. Another sign was written in marker on a small index card and was scotch-taped to the counter. It read, "For tobacco use only." Rather than waiting to be seen, Theresa decided to venture further down the hall. She felt more like an uninvited guest than a customer. There looked to be an open parlor up ahead with better lighting, so she headed for that. She distinctly thought she heard a slight buzzing sound in the distance, and Theresa took comfort in the fact that beneath the clothes she wore, she still had on her leather jumpsuit. As her eyes found themselves adjusting to the dimmer circumstances, she saw him. He leaned up against the wall just before the parlor entrance like he was posing for some kind of cigarette advertisement. His black hair was slicked back and his face was cleanly shaven. He had deep, penetrating eyes of a hue that Theresa could not yet identify. She stepped closer. He wore a black vest with a red-collared shirt beneath it, and he had on a pair of brown polyester pants. There was something about this man that seemed oddly familiar to Theresa, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. If Theresa had a better memory, she would have recognized Dmitri immediately from a small newspaper clipping that had come out a couple of weeks ago. It stated that he had just posted bail for robbing a 7-Eleven with a single-shot pistol that dated back to the 17th century. The news article went on to state that Dmitri was apprehended while riding his bicycle downhill, fleeing the scene of the crime and tossing handfuls of dollar bills in the air while laughing in hysterics. "You here to see Mama?" asked Dmitri. There was an air about him that professed a darkly ambiguous sexuality. Theresa timidly nodded her head yes. With his thumb, Dmitri pointed the way into the parlor. Theresa slowly leaned and peeked inside the parlor. She saw a young man sitting. He had broad shoulders and a weak chin. He wore a jean jacket and his head was poorly shaven. Standing behind him and over him was a tall woman with her foot on the arm of his chair. She wore a skirt that looked as though it had survived the 60s. She was an older woman, but she looked young. Her auburn hair showed no signs of graying. It was cropped shoulder length and kept out of her face in the laziest way possible. She wore a white blouse and lots of jewelry. Theresa could tell that this woman's taste was not limited to just one culture or one time. The woman was holding a small device up to her other son's ear. Theresa now recognized the buzzing sound she had heard earlier. Diane Cook was giving Bartholomew Cook a tattoo on his left ear. Diane turned her head and caught a glimpse of Theresa. "Oh," she said, "you're here early." "Yes," said Theresa. "I hope that's all right." Theresa was immediately unsure of her decision to come at all. "That's fine," smiled Diane. She had a pleasant face, and she wore her makeup well. She took her foot off the chair, and Bartholomew silently took his cue to leave the room. He barely made eye contact with Theresa as he passed her by. "My son," said Diane, answering Theresa's silent question. "I believe you already met Dmitri in the hall." "Yes," said Theresa. "I didn't know that you did tattoos here as well." "Well, I don't, technically, but I could make an exception. No, that's fine." "I see," said Diane. "Why don't you have a seat?" Getting a better look around now, Theresa saw that in front of the chair where Bartholomew sat, there was a large oak desk clustered with papers and books and knickknacks. The whole room seemed to be cluttered with all sorts of things. though less effort was clearly placed on the desk in terms of arrangement. Theresa slowly approached her seat as Diane found herself behind the desk. "You were cryptic over the phone," Diane said. "Yes," replied Theresa. She waited for the right question to be asked for her to speak more. "May I see your hands?" asked Diane. Theresa held them out for her, and she took them gently, not knowing that she was exposing her sun-tanned cleavage in the process. Theresa looked down, a little uncomfortable. "Oh, said Diane, leaning back down. "What is it?" asked Theresa. "Your hands are cold," smiled Diane. Theresa exhaled a sigh of discontent, a scoff. She wanted to leave, but something kept her. "But you didn't come here for that, did you?" asked Diane. "I mean, at least that's not the impression I got over the phone." "I think my house might be haunted," said Theresa. "Or I think I might be haunted, my boyfriend and I." "Boyfriend?" "Well, actually, he's my fiancé," Theresa lied. She wondered if Diane could see this, but quickly asserted that Diane would not let on even if she had or had not, so it was best not to think about. "Haunted by what?" asked Diane. "Or whom?" "We don't know," said Theresa, "but we just thought, well, I just thought that you could hold some kind of..." "Exorcism?" replied Diane. "Yeah, something like that. Anything that you think might help. I'm not usually into this kind of stuff." "Well, it's only when the unusual occurs that we start doing things we wouldn't usually do." "Yeah, I guess." Theresa looked up at Diane. "That tattoo you were giving your son, what was it of?" "A constellation," said Diane. "Gemini." "Oh. Do you know the story?" "No." Theresa paused. "I don't." "It tells of twins born by different fathers. One the son of God, the other the son of a king. They fought together side by side until the mortal son died, and the other pleaded to renounce his divinity and join his brother in the sky." "Are your boys twins?" asked Theresa. "They certainly don't look it." "No," replied Diane simply. "Dimitri is slightly older, though I can't recall by how much. We've never been big on celebrating birthdays. They do have different fathers, though, from another life." At the risk of prying, Theresa decided not to investigate further. "There is one thing that comes to mind," said Diane. "I mean, in regards to your situation. It's a blessing, a cleansing ceremony." "Do you really think that will help?" asked Theresa. "Oh, yes," said Diane confidently. "I can cleanse your house from all negative energy." "And what about us?" "Well," said Diane, "home is where the heart is." 21. Dan was at work when he got the phone call. His father was dying. It was for real this time, no joking. Dan felt himself wearing the mask of someone prepared. Every hair on his body was standing on end. He looked down at his cell phone for a moment before deciding to put it in the drawer below the cash register. Based on its most recent phone call, he wasn't going to use it for a long time. He grabbed his coat and stepped out of the booth. Edward was Dan's de facto boss. He was the oldest co-worker Dan had and the one who had been there the longest, though he never knew Dan's father. Ed immediately began to panic when he saw that Dan was leaving. "Where are you going?" he shouted from his booth. "It's not your break yet." "I'm leaving," said Dan. "Bullshit, you can't leave. It's almost rush hour." Ed was right. The day had slipped by like a thief, and it was almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon. "I quit," said Dan. He lost his body as a fit of rage suddenly came upon him. With a solid fist, he punched out the automated toll sensors. A few cars had slowed to observe this little outburst, this scene of a man acting unusual. "What the hell are you doing?" cried Ed. He left his booth now and tried to catch up to Dan, but it was too late. Dan was already in his car. He got in, slammed the door, and drove away. It was hard for him to concentrate. His hands gripped the wheel too tightly, and his foot would periodically slam down on the gas. Eventually, he was able to compose himself as he pulled into the hospital parking lot. The young receptionist greeted Dan from her desk with a worried look. Dan recognized her instantly from the other day and from the strip club. She stood cautiously to meet his frightened gaze, but Dan hurried past her. In the room, it was the most upsetting thing Dan could possibly imagine. There it was, perched on top of the rails, surrounding the hospital bed. It was huge now. Dan guessed that if he had seen it standing tall, it would be 7 feet. It was slick and green and black all over, with a wide mouth of tiny fangs and red glowing eyes. The room was dark. Dan couldn't speak, and he felt his knees starting to go. He would have fallen if he hadn't caught some fear and balance. Dan's father laid in bed, and a nurse attended to his aid. Neither one of them seemed to be aware of the beast. The nurse turned and saw that Dan was present. She excused herself and slipped past him as he entered deeper into the room. He was not going to be afraid of this thing. The monster said nothing. It just continued to stare at him with a sadistic sense of glee. Victor tried to turn and see that his son had entered. "Daniel," he said. "Yeah," said Dan, trying to sound normal, trying not to see what was sitting above his father. "Come closer," he said. "I'm losing it." Victor held out his hand for Daniel to take, and Daniel took it. "What is it?" he asked. He felt the grip of his father. It was what kept him focused against the sight of what should not have been seen, the elephant in the room, the monster. "You're my priest," said the old man. "What?" Dan asked. "For my confessional. Last rite," replied Victor. "Dad, don't do this," said Dan. "All right," said the old man. He was his usual self, insanity on the edge, but willing to return at beck and call. "Do you see it?" he asked. Dan looked up at the monster, and the monster nodded its head yes. "Yeah, Dad, I see it," replied Dan. Dan wasn't exactly sure what his father was referring to, and he wasn't exactly sure he wanted to. Dan knew his father to be senile, so to agree with him that there was a 7-foot-tall beast somehow balancing on the rails of a hospital bed was not a good sign, nor was it a good sign to agree with something else entirely. "What does it look like?" asked Victor. At this moment, Dan knew that he and his father were not talking about the same thing. "Is it an angel?" "Yeah, Dad, it looks just like an angel." Daniel kept his eyes averted, and without saying anything, the beast on the edge of the bed got down from the rail and slid under the bed. "I had a thought today," Victor casually mused. "What's that, Dad?" I thought... Victor started and then let the following silence pave its way for something profound. At the moment of your death, you become like a newborn god, wandering the dreams of the body that once held you. What's your confession, Dad? My what? You called me a priest. I did? Yeah, for your confession. Dan no longer wanted to be angry for whatever forgotten reason. He loved the old man that lay next to him. I'll listen, offered Dan. My confession... Victor was drifting now. There's a combination safe in the attic, he said. There's a what? Responded Dan to his father's cryptic announcement. Yes, his father said. It was one word, but it had the weight of War and Peace. His father slowly closed his eyes, and the warm glow from the sunlit window illuminated an infinite amount of dust-mite staircases that led up into the air and towards the ceiling, fading out of the light. Victor was peaceful. Daniel was perplexed. An onslaught of grief hugged Dan as his head began to hurt from stifling his emotions. He felt bitter towards the sight of himself, hunched over, his hands at his face like a fucking cliché. These were the last moments he would have as a son. He had quit his job, and now, alone with his shadows, he had to stand up and face the coming clouds of a life in turmoil. A life upside down where monsters were real and the days were hanging by a thread behind the mask of understanding and that mask of normalcy. Diane sat at her desk, joined by her two sons. She revealed the cards from her tarot deck as if they told a very long story, and with each card drawn she would speak and devise the plan. So tonight we case the joint, she spoke softly. The usual mumbo-jumbo stuff. She turned to look at Bartholomew and Dmitri. Meaning, she said, while I perform, you and your brother will casually keep an eye out for things we may want later. Why are you talking to us like we're kids? Asked Dmitri, a little annoyed. You know how your brother is, was Diane's short little quip. Bartholomew just looked up at his mother and, as usual, said nothing. That way, when we return later that night, we'll know exactly what we're going for. No shit, said Dmitri. He looked down at his brother, seated at the desk across from Diane. Dmitri had the habit of standing in the shadows. He wore them. They were as natural to him as the feel of his own skin. Look for guns, said Diane. She's got a fiancé, and we don't need him playing the hero. What is it that they want? Asked Bartholomew. They think the house is haunted. They're young. This should be easy. When Dan got home, Theresa was waiting for him in the kitchen. You're home early, she said. How was your day? How was your day? Dan tentatively asked as he tossed his keys and the mail onto the kitchen table. I went and saw somebody. Who? A shrink? Asked Dan. No, not that. We have to do something, said Dan under his breath. And I am doing something, or rather, I did do something. Dan knew that when Theresa spoke in fragments like this, it couldn't be good. What did you do? He asked, afraid of what the answer might be. I went and saw somebody who I think can help. You know that place off of Barker Street?" "The psychic?" asked Dan. "No, not a psychic. Don't call her that. She's a medium." "The fuck is the difference?" asked Dan. "I don't know. I can't remember." Theresa began to step towards Dan now. "Dan, are we just going to act like nothing happened last night?" Dan wanted so desperately to tell Theresa about his father dying that day, and about how he quit his job, and about how things were in turmoil. But he decided that at that instant it wasn't necessarily the best time. In an odd way, it felt kind of good to be so considerate. But his grief was still there, waiting for him. "Dan, is something wrong?" asked Theresa. "You seem distant." "What's the psychic gonna do for us?" he asked. "This medium." "She's gonna bless the house," said Theresa. She now had a hand on Dan's shoulder. Dan leaned up against the wall like a slow-moving domino. "And us, for that matter." Without saying anything, Dan reached for Theresa's shirt. It didn't take much to undo the first button, and he parted the fabric only to see the leather suit Theresa wore underneath. He was hoping to see her breast. Theresa buttoned her shirt back up. Whatever it is from last night, it was evil, and evil can be defeated by goodness. The naivete of Theresa's statement caused Dan to question everything. Was the monster really evil? All it really wanted was something they didn't have. "I don't like it," said Dan. "How much is she charging us?" "Dan, what else do you propose we do?" Theresa was pleading. "I'm really asking you. You know, we haven't talked about last night." I'll call it all off if you would just talk to me." "All right," said Dan. "How long is all of this going to take?" "What?" "The psychic, the medium, the witch, whatever." "Dan, why won't you just talk to me?" Dan shook free from her whimpering grip and fled the room. In the living room he stopped, looking up and seeing the bullet holes he made the previous night. Suddenly there was an eye present in one of them. "Are you watching me?" shouted Dan. "Are you watching me now?" Theresa joined Dan by his side. "My father died today," Dan finally said to Theresa, "and this damn thing was there." Dan pointed up at the ceiling. The eye shifted away from its peephole, but not before Theresa had caught a glimpse of it. "Oh, Dan," she said. She buried her face in his arms. "I'm so sorry." Dan breathed a moment and composed himself. "I know you are." He smelled her hair calmly. "So am I." Theresa said nothing. Their circumstances were unique, she knew this, and in her mind, beneath the great big bucket at the bottom of the well, she began to weep without even trying. She did not reach for it, only waited for Daniel to try. Dan's eyes burned as a salty tear found its way from the blood behind his face. It was here they stood. For how long, neither of them could really say for sure. Time slipped through the silence like a solemn skier, hitting every mound as a mark of the minute. Diane drove her two boys around in an old Dodge Caravan. It was white with wood-sided paneling.
Dmitri had done some work to the exhaust system earlier that day, and so it seemed to have been running in the best possible condition they could have hoped for. Diane caught a glimpse of her sons in the rearview mirror. It's supposedly an old house, so check the attics for ghosts and valuables. Diane knew that Dmitri was listening, but Bart had his face in a book. "Bartholomew, are you listening?" she asked. "Love is a canvas furnished by nature and embroidered by imagination," said Bartholomew, reading. "Who's that?" Diane asked, making conversation. "Voltaire," replied Bart. "Love is for parasites," said Dmitri. He leaned up from his seat to adjust the crotch in his pants and sat back down. He wore tan jeans, a white-collared shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and an array of womanly bracelets around his wrists. It was a wardrobe change for all of them. Diane wore bright colors now and a silk scarf. She smiled slightly at Dmitri's casual remark. She was proud of her little heartbreaker. Bart stared out the window. "I never said I agreed with it. It's just a book of quotes." "Yeah, well," said Dmitri as he turned his attention to Diane. "You and the elephant man here just keep the two busy and I'll get a good scope of the place." They pulled into the driveway of Dan and Theresa's home as things started to come together. Theresa answered the door when the bell rang. Dan wasn't present. He was recuperating. He sat in the kitchen with his head in his hands. "Hello," said Diane warmly. She entered with Dmitri and Bart in tow. They were shy accomplices. Shy, each in their own way. Dmitri was shady. Bartholomew was glum. Diane observed the room and house openly, her body gently spinning in the living room. "Hi," said Theresa. "Come in. Thank you for coming." At this point, Dan found a place to stand and be aware. It was where the living room met the kitchen. "It's been a difficult day for us," said Theresa, switching gears horribly. "Dan's father just—" "Theresa, don't," said Dan. He was serious. "I think I understand," said Diane. "But that isn't why—" No, we need you for something different." Upon hearing this, Diane instantly opened up her warm face with anticipation and support. She put a gentle hand on Theresa, who nearly broke down in the presence of someone so accepting. "It's a monster," she finally said. Yes, replied Diane. "I inferred from our conversation and the negative energy." No, said Theresa. "You don't understand. It's a monster. Under our bed." Dan, in his corner, felt self-conscious and angry at Theresa for exposing the both of them and their situation so readily. Diane embraced Theresa with a hug, though, and it did make Dan feel a little bit better to see Theresa get some much-needed comfort he himself was not able to give her. "Well, let's go take a look, shall we?" replied Diane. She was very motherly to Theresa, and Dan noticed she had a way of moving about the house. It was almost a dance. She nearly floated and twirled, every breath containing the shadows and dragons of a woman. It was a wonderful and seductive display. Dan followed Theresa and Diane up the stairs, and eventually Dmitri and Bart came too. Bart had always known he was different ever since he was a little boy. He rightfully assumed that he could feel sensations that others could not. It was a secret he kept from even his mother, despite her perceived willingness to accept such things. As a child, he loved to study the mechanics of things, but being woefully inadequate in technique, he would often inadvertently break the subject of his study. Such was the case regarding the dishwasher when he put his mother's 35mm camera inside. What was most interesting about this incident was the repairman who came over to the house to fix the machine. He was an older man with a knowing gleam in his eye. "Were you trying to catch the gnomes?" the old man asked young Bartholomew. "You see, there are these little monsters that live in the machine and soap suds, and they break things because they're naughty," the old man smiled. "But I don't mind. They keep me working." It was those very same gnomes that Bartholomew could sometimes detect, even at his age of 23. Bart was an overgrown 23-year-old, so the prospect of little tiny creatures intrigued him greatly. Bart knew them to be microscopic. He found himself in the bathroom now. It was dark, and it was unintended for him to be there.
He knew his mother wanted him searching other rooms for valuables while she kept the host busy, and that's exactly what he would have done had it not been for the fact that when he turned the light on, something amazing happened. First, there was a buzz that came from the light. Bart saw the tiny speckled dust mites that escaped from the light, which was mounted just above the medicine cabinet. They were black like flies, but they flew with a purpose. Bart knew what was expected of him, but he instantly covered his mouth and nose with both of his hands so not to breathe them in. It was of no use, though. The little gnomes had decided on an alternate route into Bartholomew's brain. And all at once he began to feel that magical sensation. He found it rather discomforting. It made him feel as though he had lost his body, which, in essence, he did. He felt his mind go numb and blank, and he became merely a witness to his own actions. He saw his right hand slowly reach for the lipstick on top of the counter. He saw himself in the mirror unscrewing the lipstick so the prominent red could be put to good use. He felt his puppet body jerk forward a bit as he began to write with the lipstick onto the bathroom mirror. He soon passed out and collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. In the bedroom, Diane did her best to look around without the appearance of someone who was shopping. She checked under the bed as instructed by Theresa. There was nothing there. She got to her feet. "I think I know what will help," said Diane. "What's that?" asked Theresa. Dan held her at the doorway. His eyes were skeptical. "I am going to perform a ritual with incense," replied Diane. "It's a Wiccan tactic." "Wiccan?" asked Dan. "Yes. Does that offend you?" Diane politely asked. "No," replied Theresa, answering for Dan. "I will need some space," said Diane. "Perhaps it would be best if you two left." Theresa looked to Dan for approval. He gave none. "It's better to start off pure, and then to have you enter with your life presence," said Diane. "I see," said Dan. He didn't really see. "Why don't the two of you go down to the living room and wait for me there? This should only take a moment," said Diane. At the risk of being forceful, Theresa latched onto Dan's arm and pulled him away.